profitability and doing the right thing are not mutually exclusive. And actually some of the bigger organisations that we've talked about, where actually it's all well and good one particular division of a big multinational business having specific kind of standards, but everyone in terms of the shareholders, everyone on the board is saying you've got to be responsible and you've got to be profitable. And again, there's test cases to prove that it's infinitely doable.
Unfortunately, I see a huge amount of communication waste in organisations. People are faster and faster and faster, and they're spitting out messages and spitting out communication all over the place in every single channel. And it's wasted communication because sometimes it's not effective. It doesn't get received in the right way on the other end.
I can't help but think as we're talking that a big part of the kindness is actually people slowing down, patience, and just seeking to understand, because I think a lot of conflict comes from literally people saying, I've got some feedback for you, I'm going to give it to you in 30 seconds flat, right, you okay with that? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Just slowing down, and I've learned a lot over the last 5 years about just slowing the hell down and making sure that you've understood each other, not just that I've been understood or vice versa.
Welcome to another episode of the Commercial Confidence Podcast. I'm here today with Sally Pritchett, the founder and CEO of Something Big. And the big topic of conversation today will be that kindness and profit do not need to be mutually exclusive. Welcome to the podcast.
Sally, thank you so much for hosting us today. We're hoping to see a canal barge come past at some point as we talk, but thank you so much for hosting and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be on a podcast with this title, given some of my confessions that we'll have in a minute.
We'll come to the title in a moment, because I think it's the first time we've ever pre-agreed a title, because it's something we're both really, really passionate about. So that'll be great. But what would be amazing is if you could just take us through who is Sally, talk to us about Something Big, where you've been, where you're going, and just give us some history. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, let's start with Sally. So Sally is in her fourth decade of her career. So I think I will sometimes call myself a comms veteran. I am a wise old lady now, I think, in my fourth decade at work. And throughout that has been communications as my sort of subject matter expertise. And we'll definitely talk about that. So squiggly career, which I'm sure we can talk about in more depth, but started in a role in commercial life back in the day at a company called Compass in hospitality, and have for the last 2.5 decades, so 25 years, run as a CEO the company Something Big, which I co-founded about 25 years ago. We're a creative communications agency, and we're helping organisations talk to, and I say talk to because obviously we talk to people through lots of different medium, but talk to their employees, their customers, their partners, their suppliers, their communities, etc. So that's what I've been doing on a professional side. But I guess on a personal side, I'm a mum. I've got, this is going to be an embarrassing age-related thing, but I've known my husband for 38 years. So yeah, my husband and I have 3 growing adult children now. I'm ADHD, and I think that will probably become obvious during this podcast. So feel free to understand that as we go through. And yeah, let's start with my first confession for this podcast. Yeah, given the title of your podcast, I'm kind of an imposter because I did fail my maths O-level. If you're listening to this and you're under my age, then that's GCSE twice.
Twice?
But yeah, twice. That was good going, wasn't it? Parents must have been very proud. I think that's quite an interesting dichotomy, given I think of myself as pretty commercial.
And running a very successful business.
Well, and business for me and commercial kind of stuff started at a really young age. At the age of 14, I probably had my first business. I was pretty commercially savvy at that stage and thought babysitting was the way to go. So had palmed out babysitting jobs to a whole load of friends where I was making commission and had a pretty neat little thing going on there. So yeah, failed maths O-level.
But a pyramid scheme expert.
But pretty business savvy. So I feel like maybe I'm allowed to be on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for that. We talked a moment ago about kind of predetermining the title.
Yeah.
And we had two in mind. One was Sally Hates Waste. And we'll talk a lot about Sally Hates Waste in a moment. But actually, probably more interestingly, we talked about the fact that profit and kindness don't need to be mutually exclusive. And I think we said ultimately, kindness does not have to come at the expense of profit. And I think we'll talk a lot today about organisations that are getting it right. Examples where, without naming organisations, we've both seen things not go so well. So I'd just love to get your take on why you're so passionate about that topic.
Yeah, and I think in one of our conversations we also had this thought. So for many years when I was running a business for the first time, so, I did do a decade in the corporate environment. I had a pretty good grounding on how corporates do commercial. I didn't always think that was right. I didn't always think it was fair. And there were lots of decisions that I perhaps wouldn't have taken if I wasn't forced into them when I was in the corporate environment. And I think when I went out on my own and co-founded something big, I thought, well, I can do commercial the way I do commercial now. I can do business the way I want to do business. It's a lot more about fairness for me. So ethics and my own moral compass was much easier when I didn't have the constraints of a company. But I did spend a lot of time looking at other people thinking that they were doing it right, possibly, and that maybe I wasn't doing it right because I was definitely doing it a bit differently. And I think, there was a gender element in that as well for me. I was a woman and often in a room full of male counterparts, either running businesses or buying from me or whatever. And I would think, and I would remember back to I didn't pass maths. So I would think, they must be more commercially savvy than me. They must get this better. And somewhere in that journey, and I think, and I'm 25 years into running something big now, we've never had an overdraft, we've never not made profit other than COVID year. So I could probably forgive myself.
I think you could forgive yourself that one.
And I think there comes a time where you start to go, oh, hang on, maybe I'm doing things right and the world is doing it wrong. And you get that little bit more confidence in your approach. Hence our title, because I do things very fairly, very kindly. I have good relationships with people like suppliers and customers, etc. And I don't think that we have to sacrifice that kindness and ethics and morals just to do good business and make profit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the conversations that we had that I really enjoyed is kindness doesn't mean being a pushover, doesn't mean letting people take advantage, but kindness just giving people time for quality feedback. So if somebody wants to come and be a supplier to something big, you don't have to say yes, you can say no, but give them the credit and the due respect to give them feedback about maybe why they weren't successful. And that's a kind act. It doesn't mean you're giving anything away commercially, but you're giving them a chance to maybe come back again and have another go. So I think that's an important element, giving people time and feedback and respect.
I have a great story on that, actually, and a classic example of that. So we, as a B Corp business that we've transitioned to certified B Corp, we wanted our supply chain to be more sustainable. But obviously I have a plethora of suppliers, some of which I've got great long-standing partnerships with, and we are a key part of their business, and others where we can switch perhaps because we're a small part of their business and maybe we can find a more sustainable option. But I had one particular supplier who I've worked with for 25 years. They do great work with us. We've had a great partnership, but they weren't on that sustainability journey. And of course, there's different ways of doing this. I can just go, well, our approach is you must have this kind of sustainability credentials, or you need to be a B Corp or whatever. Or I can just go and get round the table with them and say, this is what I'm doing. This is the journey we're on. How can you do this in a very difficult, the thing that they do is quite difficult because it's not very sustainable. So we went and sat, and I took my ESG and sustainability manager with me, and we went and sat round a table. We went round their facility, and we looked at ways that they could reduce waste. Talking of waste, and we looked at ways that they could get on that journey. And actually what we found in that conversation is that they were doing more than they thought they were doing, and they loved it. They had all sorts of ideas and inspiration from us, and we get what we need, they get what they need, the world is happy. So that's
and they could be a more responsible supplier to other organisations.
Absolutely. And they're going to do stuff with their supply chain too.
Absolutely.
So the ripple effect is big, and that comes from a place of kindness. But commercially, I've got a great relationship with them. Starting with a new supplier would not be great. So we're all better off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I read an article maybe 3 weeks ago in a Sunday paper, and it was the chief executive of Timothy Taylor Breweries. And if I remember correctly, he'd had a big corporate career. One of the organisations was Unilever. And he was basically saying, as a circa £30 million business, they alone really struggle to keep up with changes in legislation, changes in expectation, etc., let alone some of their suppliers that are smaller than they are. So he demonstrated great empathy with some of their challenges. It sounds like a similar story, which says it's not easy to keep up with expectations and keep up with legislation, but if we all support each other, then you can maintain those relationships for the longer term.
And I 100% agree. And we find this actually with one of our largest clients, who are a really enormous organisation. And they really help us because they do show us how that things can be done and the sort of expectations that are required. But you know how we respond with that as well is that as a smaller organisation, we can be innovative. We can share with them different ways of doing things that they perhaps didn't see. So again, I think it's that partnership of, yes, they're helping me keep up with things that I couldn't necessarily see coming. But yeah, I can bring that entrepreneurialism that they haven't always got in a large organisation. Two-way thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the same way, that organisation that was supplied to you, they're looking at something big and saying they're a trusted, reliable partner. If we can just help them in that direction, because maybe they haven't got the resources to do everything, then again, everyone's winning along that relationship.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about was around it's you challenging yourself on, am I missing something? Am I getting it right? Am I running my business in the right way? And I know one of the conversations we've had is the fact that profitability and doing the right thing are not mutually exclusive. And actually some of the bigger organisations that we've talked about, where actually it's all well and good one particular division of a big multinational business having specific kind of standards, but everyone in terms of the shareholders, everyone on the board is saying you've got to be responsible and you've got to be profitable. And again, there's test cases to prove that it's infinitely doable.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think maybe it does put more pressure on us as organisations that are trying to bring this ethics in. But I feel the responsibility of demonstrating this sort of what I would call a blueprint for a better business. This concept of being, we're B Corp, I'm sure we'll come on to it, but we're also employee owned.
Yes.
We will come on to that. But, together these things do help us demonstrate that things can be done in a different way. But I love how the B Corp community also takes this huge responsibility to heart. I know a new chair from Ben & Jerry's when Ben & Jerry's was in the midst of the portfolio of Unilever, but Ben & Jerry's was a B Corp. And she said, I can't just be profitable like my colleagues in the rest of Unilever. I have to be a shining example of profitability. Otherwise, I jeopardize people saying to me, hey, this B Corp thing, we can't do that. And another example, which we probably all know, is that wonderful Tony's Chocolonely. And, Douglas Lamont there talks about, 60% of my customers don't even really understand or care about my moral compass and what we're trying to do with slavery in chocolate industry. So they have to be buying me because I've got great chocolate. So I don't want anyone to be thinking that because we're B Corp, our quality is lower, our commercial results are worse. We're not doing one thing to the detriment of anything else. We're trying to demonstrate we can do both.
Absolutely.
And they come hand in hand.
Yeah. I was very fortunate early in my career. I took part in a SAP implementation workshop. You wonder where I'm going with this. But the reward for being locked in a room in Frankfurt for 5 days while I was at Nestle was that Paul Polman, who was the CFO of Nestle at the time, came into the room and basically talked to us about Nestle as a bigger organisation. And it was long before he obviously moved to Unilever and really started driving the sustainability agenda. But I remember Paul talking about, I want volume growth and profit. I want volume growth and I want to do the right thing as a business. And it was the and as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking back to that conversation where I thought, that's really, really hard to do, but you've seen it done in the Unilever business. And it's really started to, prove to be infinitely possible on a purpose and a profit perspective.
And I think I'm always an optimist, and I'm always solutions focused. And I think and that's probably that commercial savviness that I grew up in when I was, doing a babysitting business at 14. But I think there is how can I have my cake and eat it? That whole phrase, if you can't have your cake and eat it, I've never understood that. What is the point of having cake? You can't eat
Just
it.
to look at.
But there's something I came across actually during my career, which is beautiful constraints. I don't know if you've seen that. We'll put the book notes in the notes. But we start with the sort of how can I have this and that? What if? And it's the sort of almost like that Airbnb story of how can I be the biggest and most welcoming hotel chain, but not buy a single hotel. And if we have constraints, often what we used to do is go to blue sky thinking, like if money and time and resources were no object, then what could I do? Well, it's not very helpful, because we do have constraints. We are running out of resources, be that natural gases, whatever, and we don't have infinite budgets. So beautiful constraints is an approach that brings those constraints in and makes them beautiful, and say, well, how can I do this if I also want that? And that's what I'm hearing from you.
Not pushing it to the side and making it a get out of jail free card. Bring it in and face into it.
Bring it in and face into it and say, okay, but how do I get volume? But I want this. I mean, this might be the perfect time for my sausage story.
I was going to go there, but absolutely. I think if we frame that conversation around, you've described to me a career in 4 parts, 4 10-year periods. So yeah, please do, because I think understanding some of your corporate career compass and that great story, and then moving through to so that we can then touch on the employee ownership, I think that would be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So for the listeners that are thinking of sausages, the first decade, the listeners who are thinking, where's this going? Where is this going? So my first decade was in the catering and hospitality industry. So yeah, we've squiggled since then. But what was really great is there was a moment, one of my favourite days of my career in that sort of environment was my first day in a sort of real proper commercial role, catering director of a very glamorous end of catering, which was motorway service areas. We've all been there, we've all stopped at them, and we've probably all eaten my sausages. And so my first day, I pitch up, I've got a lovely corner office, I've got a lovely PA, this is great. So I said to my PA at the time, so I'd really like to start with what the customers are unhappy about. Do we have any log of complaints or anything like that? Now, I'm old, so this is pre-email, pre-review sites, people couldn't
This is not very sustainable.
This is not sustainable, this bit, but so she said, oh yeah, sure, we keep all of the complaint letters. And she trots into the office with a huge arch lever folder and plonks it down on the thing. And she said, so this is sausages. And she doesn't stop there. She goes back and forth, back and forth and back and forth until we've probably got 12 or 13 arch lever folders on my table. Right, all of these ones, Sally, this is about 6 folders worth of complaints, are sausages. And all of these ones are the price of tea and coffee. And I was like, well, this is going to be the easiest job in the world, because I've got 2 main things that are going to, if I can solve these 2 things. So my sausage complaints were about the meat content of my sausages. And, I think this does come down to the crux of what we're talking about here, because of course, I can just go, okay, I've got a terrible supplier of sausages and I need a different supplier of sausages. Or the supplier might be saying, well, that's fine, but you want this price point on these sausages, right?
You may have been culpable in getting the sausages to that quality.
Right. And so there's a lot of breadcrumbs in here because you wanted it at this price. So, of course, this now takes kind of kindness. It takes partnership. It takes a lot of thought and innovation to solve this problem. Right. And maybe this is a good opportunity also to bring in a lovely thing I heard from Cook recently about how they do partnerships, particularly with their suppliers. And they have these kind of 3 things that they have: appreciation, so that we both need to appreciate each side of it. So I needed to appreciate what was causing this meat content and what were the pain points for my supplier. They have clarity. Listen, we want better sausages, right? We both need to be working in the same thing. And then we need unity. We need to both be on that same page. Now, another confession for this podcast, I'm probably going to call myself a manufacturing and supplier nerd, supply chain nerd, logistics. If you've got a big machine, a facility with a massive machine in it, or you've got a logistics plant or something like that, you know, that's the way to my heart. Invite me to a factory tour and I'm there.
Other retailers are available, but have you ever been to the Ocado fulfillment?
No, I haven't. Take me there.
You need to. I can't. I haven't got the linkages. I'm sure we can find a way.
I'm too excited.
It's out of this world. Because I am as geeky as
I
you.
do love, you know, a automatic sort load or anything like that. Anyway, conveyor belts. Anyway, so of course, where did I go with my sausages? I went to the facility. I went and we sat around a table. We went and looked at the sort of factory. We looked for waste. We'll come back to waste again, but you know, we look for what are we missing here that we can both work on together to get these sausages sorted. So we digress a bit, but my first decade of my career was those kind of things. And then we've moved in, and I think you're alluding to the way I look at my business. Yeah. So I'm in, about year 25 now of running the business. I see the first decade of that as startup. And all the shocking elements of leaving a corporate environment with PAs to do everything and moving into an area where you are wearing every single hat. Absolutely. You are marketing, you are sales, you are, HR, you are everything. That was a shocker. And I tried to manage to have 3 kids during that first decade. So that was pretty disruptive and busy and physically demanding.
Absolutely.
And it was in the days before, people on this podcast won't understand this, but, we had to take checks. Our clients paid us by check, and we had to take the checks to the bank. There wasn't anyone else to take the check to the bank. So you would have the phone, the main company phone would be diverted to my mobile. And I would be in the queue in the post office trying to send something, and I'd be answering the phone. So, those were physically demanding scale-up days, and I feel for anyone that's in that scale-up space. The second decade was what I call scale-up. I came back having had my 3rd child. The economic conditions were good. We'd got some momentum. We doubled in size one year. Wow. Maybe that's a whole nother podcast.
That's definitely a separate podcast. Yeah.
That's a separate podcast. That was really hard, and I don't advise it. 3rd decade, which I'm in now, and I'm loving actually, is legacy. I feel like I want to look at my children, and I don't want them to say, "Wow, Mum, you ran a business." I want them to say, "Wow, Mum, you left a legacy. You did you showed people to do things differently." That's hence the B Corp. Yeah. It's the employee ownership. It's podcasts like this. I have a little exclusive for this podcast, actually. Shall I give you a little exclusive?
Please do.
I am week 1 into writing a book. So I now have a book coach. And so the thought of being an author, I mean, this is for a girl who is dyslexic. And yes, I know the irony. I'm a comms expert who's dyslexic. I get it. But yeah, to be an author, that wasn't something I was expecting in my career either. And people had nagged me about it. And I just didn't think ADHD was best suited to sitting down and writing a book in a dark room for months on end, which is what I expected it to be. But we've found a way to do the book writing. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So I'm in the legacy phase.
No, and that's great. When you described that to me when we spoke the other day, and I love that as the 4 phases. I think we also touched on that the value of those 10 years. Interesting, we had the same conversation with Lindsay Forster from Shepper on the podcast a few weeks ago. The grounding that I was sort of 15 years in big corporate, the grounding that gives you don't realise until you're out of it. And just having seen a great CFO and a great marketing director and a great sales director in operation, you just seem to get enough so that you can then wear those hats. And I'm sort of 25 months in, not 25 years in. but it gives you a great grounding in each of those areas. Also, some great people to go and call and say, "Hey, what would you do in this situation?" Because they've got great experience.
Great experience, and I love the fact that in my job in the business I run, although I'm running a small business, my clients are large corporates, and I get to work with some awesomely talented and experienced people, and I get to watch them and I get to see them doing their best stuff, and so I get best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Talk to you about employee ownership, the thought process, the physical process. I'm really interested.
I think this was really interesting. So for me, I co-founded Something Big with a business partner, and we were 50-50. And I think quite a long way into the business, maybe 15 years into the business, people started talking to me about this exit strategies. And it's an interesting thing because as a mum, I think I probably consider Something Big as one of my children, my first child. It has behaved like a child in the sense that, in those early days, it's very physical. It becomes more mentally challenging as you get on. But it also becomes more independent, just like our children do. So, I don't think I think of exit strategies with my children. It's a very odd thing to think of that for a business. I'm very personally attached to Something Big, but I did understand that the commercial side of a business is, you do need to exit it in some way financially. And so we did look at mergers and acquisitions to try and sort of grow with other organisations as well. I couldn't find anything that fitted with us culturally or commercially, to be honest. Sometimes we would open the bonnet a little bit on due diligence and look at other businesses, and they didn't quite match my standards commercially. And then obviously we questioned the sort of PE investor type route. Again, cultural chemistry, not great. And then perhaps by luck, obviously not great for the world, but we went into pandemic. And pandemic did all sorts of things, but one thing it did for a lot of us was kind of all bets were off. The way we've done things so far are now not the way we going to do things. And at that moment, within week one of pandemic, we lost 80% of our business because we had clients in the sort of hotel, leisure, airport sort of environment, and they just couldn't sustain anything. So suddenly all bets were off. Absolutely. Suddenly the business actually had no value. So this idea of exiting was null and void. And we came across employee ownership. I knew someone who had done it. I spoke to somebody about it, and I thought, hang on a minute. So you're saying I can continue to run this business, the team, the clients can all have the same experience, but I can also exit financially. And that's been one of the best decisions. We probably end to end did that from first conversation to final signatures was probably less than 4 months.
Wow.
Which you can't do in a business, with due diligence and other things like that. That's not how it would go.
And a million renegotiations as you go through the due diligence. And everything that comes with it.
Yeah. It was the best decision we ever did. But I think now I'm 3 or 4 years on, I would say I'm even happier with the discussion because about 12 months ago, we probably had quite a commercially tough environment. The economics were tough. Every business was having a hard time. We were sort of restabilizing after pandemic. We couldn't give bonuses to our team. But what we could do is we could sit down as a company and have that discussion and say, hey, this is where we're at. So the choices we now need to make are, and the team was saying to me, right, hey, Sally, we don't need Christmas parties. We don't need new chairs in the office. Can we reduce the size of our office? The team are coming to me with the things that they want to do. We are then talking about the importance of various metrics within our business. And that's not a conversation you're going to have when you're just an employer. But now, things are better and we're able to go, hey guys, you did these things. You sacrificed these things. And as a result, your bonuses are back and things are back on track.
Yeah.
That makes life honestly, I can't tell you how much easier that is as a CEO to be able to have your whole team on your side.
Absolutely.
I think CAO role is lonely for various reasons, but I think it can be lonely if you really have that disconnect between I'm trying to sort of squeeze as much as I want to, as much as I can out of my employees. That's not how I do things.
No, absolutely. And I think, personally, I take my hat off to you in terms of going through what would have been a massively challenging time in the pandemic with actually at the same time thinking, how do I recover the revenue, but also how do I set ourselves up for success through the employee ownership scheme. And I was very lucky that I was part of a group with a bigger parent, but nonetheless it was an agency environment and revenue went to zero for 4 months. We had some big clients who remained supportive, and there was other obviously mechanisms that the government put in place. But to be able to take all of that burden, with you and a smallish team, and think about the future, and to come back having had bonuses are back and the business is flying is fantastic.
I actually think this is where ethics really help us as well, because this idea that morals and ethics come, and my point of view is they don't come at the sacrifice of commercial. I think there were some important things to do during that pandemic. Number one was look after our people, to not sort of throw them to the side and say, never mind, knowing that we were going to come out the other end of this and need those people, and those people were good and they were committed and they were loyal. We had a responsibility to look after them all the way through that pandemic. And you've actually given me a shivery memory, because of course we did have to go into furlough and other things. And we actually, like many businesses, kind of had two communities of the team, those that were working and those that were on the bench.
Absolutely.
And I can categorically say, and I know many of those team are back in, working hard for me now, but they were unhinged within about a week. They were mortified to not be able to contribute to the bigger picture, and they wanted to come and work. They wanted to do things. And if you remember rightly, the furlough rules were pretty strict.
Absolutely. If you don't need them, you don't need them.
Absolutely. So we had just as much of a job as a CEO. I had just as much of a job to look after those people and not let them work and reassure them and things like that. But we also had customers who were absolutely in meltdown because they were, and they couldn't pay me, but I could still support them. That's what we had to do. So ethics during that period of time really brought that commercial sort of part to the front, because we had to get through it together.
Absolutely.
Partnership.
You've just brought back, you said you shuddered, I've shuddered. I remember going into one of our offices about 10 miles from my house, being pulled over by the police on the way, asking me what I was doing out and about. I presented them with a letter to say, I work in a key worker industry. Policeman saying, but that letter's signed by you. I said, well, I'm the MD for Europe, and I was the only person that signed it on behalf of all of my colleagues as well. So having convinced him I was okay to go to the office, got to the office, and myself and Justine, our FD, who was fantastic, she and I kind of alternating, moving the mouse around on the computer while we uploaded all of the furlough payments onto a very ramshackle government website, while one of us made the tea or nip to the loo, because literally if you got to employee number 798 of 800 and paused, it would kick you out of the system. So hopefully never again with those two experiences.
Hopefully never again. But it taught us lots, didn't it?
Absolutely.
It taught us lots. And I think one of the things from a commercial point of view it taught me, interesting actually, I've forgotten this memory, but it taught me about risk and spreading risk, because of course we did have quite a few clients within one sector, but we were lucky enough to have other clients in sectors that were suddenly needed. We have clients like DHL who are in the supply chain industry.
Absolutely.
And of course they went into like full peak mode to get the vaccines around the world, to get PPE around the world, to keep food on the shelves, etc. So I think it was a real good lesson then about keeping yourself diversified from that perspective. Partnerships, it taught us, I look at it now, we were probably 90% UK based in terms of the work we did then. We are probably now 80-90% global based in terms of our client portfolio. So that has made a complete change. We had physical barriers to our work in those days that we don't have now. So,
and do you think there are some of the relationships that you built in those testing times that said, Something Big have done a great job for us in the UK. We've now been through some difficult times. We're going to recommend or advocate or sponsor them to grow with us in other markets. Do you think that's been there's a link there?
I think there's certainly a link between, hang on a minute, we now can talk to you about the work that you've done in the UK, but we're all around the world, that we just wouldn't have been able to have those conversations. And it comes back down to communication, doesn't it? Which is my passion. But, conversations, we're humans, we're people. That's how work gets done. And I know we've talked about funny comments like, business gets done on the golf course. But whether it's
not by either of us, but
not by either of us. Yeah, I definitely don't know what to do with a golf course. But I think what that really alludes to and leans into is business gets done by humans. It's people to people. People do business. Absolutely. We have conversations. We need to communicate. We need to empathise. We need to have things in common. That's how business gets done.
Yeah, I can't help but think as we're talking that a big part of the kindness is actually people slowing down, patience, and just seeking to understand, because I think a lot of conflict comes from literally people saying, I've got some feedback for you, I'm going to give it to you in 30 seconds flat, right, you okay with that? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Just slowing down, and I've learned a lot probably the last 5 years about just slowing the hell down and making sure that you've understood each other, not just that I've been understood or vice versa. So yeah, it is about investing in that kindness and investing the time to be kind.
Maybe this is where that we bring up the conversation around waste. You said earlier on, I hate waste. I do. If you ask my children what I hate the most, it doesn't matter whether we're wasting food or which I can't bear, and if my children haven't finished something or whatever, but I waste my time, waste my effort, waste my money, waste my resources, waste. I can't bear waste. And I think we, to this point that you just made about sort of slowing down, I think that's really critical. And unfortunately, I see a huge amount of communication waste in organisations. People are faster and faster and faster, and they're spitting out messages and spitting out communication all over the place in every single channel. And it's wasted communication because sometimes it's not effective. It doesn't get received in the right way on the other end. So I think there is an awful lot to be said for slow down, reduce that waste. We often talk about we want more from less. But let's go back to my sausage story. I could have just made a phone call and said, I need that sausage to have more meat content, but I need that price. And, that could have been how we handled that. But we needed to go and look at where's the waste? What is it in this process that we could do better? Let's slow down to get a better result.
Yeah.
And get better sausages.
Absolutely.
I can't speak for that. I will just say I can't speak for the sausage content today.
It's been
a while.
It's been a while. Yeah, so we can't blame you if it's not good. It's interesting what you're saying about doing more with less, and I'm probably driving people slightly mad on LinkedIn using that as a hashtag because. The simple fact is my background, as you know, is health and beauty and food and drink in the UK marketplace, in customer category, etc. And the simple fact is that for a Nestle, a P&G, a Unilever, whilst they've got a huge business in the UK, it's probably not where a lot of the growth is going to come from going forward. So actually, from an investment perspective, they're probably making more and more difficult investment choices, investment decisions. And I think there's a lot of waste along the supply chain and along the commercial discussions that goes on within our world, and slowing down and trying to find opportunities. And Ali Fisher and I talked recently about collaboration, learning when organisations should compete and learning when actually they can come together to collaborate to do something big. Pardon the pun. And there's so much opportunity to slow down and find different ways to do things to eliminate some of that wasted effort, wasted money, wasted physical resources. Absolutely.
And the beauty industry's actually got a great example of this. So in the B Corp movement, collaboration is a really big deal. So, and I'll come on to competition versus collaboration in a second, but the beauty industry have come together in the B Corp environment and have the B Coalition, I think it's called, which is a way that they're going, listen, we all know that we've got to reduce waste. We've got to have more sustainable packaging. We've all got these same problems. Let's get together. Doesn't matter that we're competitors, or maybe we're not because one is face cream and one is something else. But, the point is, that the industry needs to change. And so collaboration in that sense. I was at an event recently, and someone was from a law firm, and they said, but how can we compete, because we're so competitive, we're pitching against each other, etc. We can't be in the same room. And my response to that is, I'm in the agency world. I mean, it's dog eat dog, right? It's literally pitching. You get literally told you're pitching against your two best mates. It's,
you see them in the reception coming in, don't you?
Exactly.
That was my world before.
It's madmen, but it's, I'm literally in a procurement deal at the moment with one of my mates, and so we can't get much more competitive than the agency world. But guess what I lead? I lead a B Corp agency alliance of 16 agencies. We talk on the phone with each other and we go, how are you doing new biz? And we talk about how we're doing new biz. Now, if that is possible, which sounds ridiculous, because we're giving each other tips to beat each other, but we're not, because we're humans.
Yeah, but you're raising the tide for all boats, aren't you?
Absolutely. And actually, that's one of the things that, because it's a B Corp agency alliance, I say, listen, agencies on this call, and I'm very bossy. Our role in that alliance is to demonstrate that agencies not known for their morals and ethics are going to be, these agencies in this alliance are going to be the best example of ethics and morals, but also with commercial. We've got to be, back to a news comment about Ben and Jerry's, has to be a shining star. If we can demonstrate that B Corp agencies can be really commercially thriving, then we've got a compelling argument for the rest of the industry. So I think collaboration really, you've got to stop thinking it's us against them, it's competition. You've got to work collaboratively.
Choose the bits to compete on, choose the bits to collaborate on.
Absolutely.
And have you got a charter within that group?
We do.
Yeah.
We actually do. Yeah. What are we here to do? And I'm wondering if I can say this on the podcast, but we do have one about, honesty. So let's just say it begins with a B, but there's no B word in this. You can fill in the blanks, but there's no B word in this alliance, because what we want to do is come and show up honestly, authentically. And if someone is having a hard time and they're not making as much money, or they've got something going on, they can honestly find this as a psychologically safe place to be and to speak up, because we would much rather help each other. So I really feel like as an alliance, we're in it together.
That's really nice.
And we're competitors, so if we can do it, anyone can do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. And I'd love to chat to you offline about the health and beauty.
Yeah. They're doing great work, because the world needs us to change that industry. And hey, they won't be the only industry. There'll be any industry listening to this will have its problems.
Yeah.
We have clients that have got aviation industry. We work with airports. We work with logistics providers. These are not easy industries to suddenly make sustainable. There's big change coming. So why not collaborate on it and do it together?
Yeah, absolutely. And speed things up.
Yeah, that's it. To your point about slow things down, we slow down to speed up.
Yeah, slow down, discuss where you can and can't collaborate to speed up the impact of that collaboration.
Absolutely, yeah.
Changing tack slightly, one of the things I'd love to understand from you, the bit I love about your organisation is the piece around internal comms and supporting clients with internal comms.
Yeah.
One of the big things that's happened just this week within the food and drink industry is the merger of Britvic and Carlsberg. There is a process going on between Mars and Kellanova, the owner of the Kellogg's brand. If you were in those rooms talking about the creation of a combined culture, how you communicate that culture, how you get people to embrace the new culture, what would your advice be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right, let's start at the beginning, because this is where this is my day job. But culture, you use that word, and it's a bit like strategy. It's a bit like any word that's just such a big concept. Culture is huge. You can have a good one, a toxic one, you can have different ones. So I think so the first thing I'm going to say is my analogy for these two businesses coming together, whatever they are, is a sort of blended family one. So if anyone listening has ever been divorced and, got children and then they've remarried and they've got other children, they might have had one house over here and another house over there. And in this house, we're allowed to have the TV on when we have dinner. And in that house over there, we're allowed to, not eat our greens. Everyone will have different ways of doing things, right? And I think the first thing that any of these organisations can do is accept that they are going into a new blended family. Probably a good thing to do is to recreate, whether that's physical or not physical, but recreate the new single house that we're all going to live under, and then recreate those rules.
The charter.
Because what happens if we don't do that is that we talk at cross purposes. How we do things over here, we say it, but the people over there, they don't hear it in the same way. They don't behave in the same way. And let's not even consider for a minute that, values are not things that we put posters on the wall. Enron had integrity in their reception. That doesn't mean that, well, we all know what happened to Enron if you don't look it up. But integrity was not called.
Wasn't there.
It wasn't there. So it's not about going, well, the words that we have here at this company are these, and they're not that dissimilar to those words over there. So we'll just mash it together and it'll all be okay. We need a really good communications process now as to how we're going to bring hearts and minds on this new united journey. And it comes back to my point about Cook's nice sort of partnership thing that says we need unity, we need clarity, we need appreciation. That's what they need to be thinking about going into. And I think, I know I'm a comms person, but analogies like the blended family, they're helpful because we immediately start to think of how that feels. So if I'm child one from family one, and I've got child two over there, and maybe child one and child two are actually similar ages, they're at the sort of different, there might be teenagers or whatever, and they've been brought up in a very different way, and they're doing things at a very different time, and their boundaries are different. And that is what your two cultures are going to be doing. And they will either argue, how commercial is that going to be? Because if your teams cannot get on well,
how are they going to show up?
How are they going to show up with their customers? How are they going to get stuff done? Where's your innovation roadmap going to go? It's not commercially savvy to not have your team on board with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hate waste, but I also hate another thing. I hate people telling me that their organisations, controversial comment coming, that they are customer centric or customer first. Customer first does not work. What works is people first. They will look after your customers if you are looking after themselves, right? So we have to look after our people, and we have to role model to them the behaviour we want them to have. The statistics we see from Gallup and, all sorts of different places, Great Place to Work, all sorts of things will tell us that our staff are burning out, they're miserable, they're disengaged, they're angry, we get stressed, lonely at work, all the things that we don't want them to feel when they're going into conversations with our customers.
Yes, absolutely.
So what can I advise these people? Lean into your culture. Come and talk to me about your culture, and we'll create, you've got a blank piece of paper. You can create an amazing culture. Absolutely. Or you can let it work itself out.
Which doesn't tend to work out.
And this is why mergers and acquisitions often don't work. Because and then years down the line, people say, oh yeah, that one didn't work because the chemistry wasn't great between the two businesses. And you think, no, that's not quite right. You didn't create the right.
You didn't create the right chemistry, the right culture. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Sally, one of the things I'd love to do before we wrap up is talk to you about something I saw on your website. And it was the 6 key trends for employee well-being for 2025. One of the things that really struck me, and I think it's probably deliberate that it was number 1, was the tension that maybe exists between different generations in the workplace and some of the sources of that tension. So could you just talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting time for us as a workplace, actually, because, we have more generations in the workplace than ever before. we're actually in the UK asking our employees now to work longer than they ever have done before. So, if you can think of a 71-year-old, or maybe you are a 71-year-old, then that's what we're asking our workforce to get to. And I think, in a knowledge worker role, that might not be too physically demanding, but in a frontline role, manufacturing, logistics, retail, etc., that's kind of a big ask. Absolutely. Actually. But at the same time, we've got this wonderful young generation. I have 3 young people in my household, and they're bringing a freshness to our organisations. And as organisations, we want that next generation in. But what we've got there is we've got this real plethora of perspectives, how they see life, what they prioritise. I was actually talking to someone the other day. You could do a really good photo if I had one, but I could do a photo of my daughter's bedroom. She's 20 and at uni, and my bedroom at the same sort of age. There are similarities. We both seem to think that the floor is the wardrobe. But there are also real discrepancies. I had stuff, I had trinkets and ornaments and bits and bobs, and my daughter's room doesn't, because from a sustainability point of view, if it's not of use, she would much rather spend her money on something that she can go do or go and spend time with friends, etc. So I think we do have really good examples of how our generations are different. We actually use different language. I won't embarrass my kids by saying skibbity or whatever it is, but I'll bring some main character energy to this. But there's language that's coming up through those generations. But there's also just words that we didn't understand have different meanings to them. We did a recent survey to look at older generations as to how they see sustainability, and they think of it as pollution rather than, some of the other things that we might talk about today. So there's topics that have run through the generations that still mean different things. And I think that if we don't manage this, a bit like our conversation about 2 different cultures coming together in M&A, if we don't manage these different generations in our organisations and acknowledge those different perspectives, they create tension. They basically can't build good relationships because they see things in a different way. They communicate in a different way. And when they don't have good relationships, you get that sort of friction. You don't get good innovation. You don't get good collaboration. We actually have some stats that say productivity is a lot lower when there's more than a 14-year age gap.
Wow.
I made the mistake of saying to someone in our team the other day that I could probably be their mother because I was probably old enough. And then she told me the age of her mother, and I thought, I'll keep quiet, but maybe grandmother. Made me feel pretty old. But there is a huge age gap. So if we've got a productivity decline after just 14 years, actually we're going to have much bigger age gaps than that.
As the working population spread increases.
And there's lots of evidence to say that we've got actual discrimination at both ends of the span. So older workers, anybody over 50 apparently. So I'm an older worker, and young generations are both feeling discriminated against and overlooked and not understood. That's not going to help anyone.
Creates real challenges for making sure we've got an inclusive communication strategy.
Absolutely. And again, that's a core to what I like doing is come and talk to me about that, because I can help with how we can bring it together.
No, brilliant.
Because if you've got that freshness and energy and innovation of young people, but you've also got the wiseness, the experience, the calmness of an older generation, bring that together and you've got pure gold.
Absolutely.
Power.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Commercial as well, right? Because it's better for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ability to empathise with customers and clients of different generations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine that. You've got a young sort of buyer and an older seller, if you like. Those relationships, customer relationships, aren't going to work.
No, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Sally. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I think there is definitely a follow-up to be done when the book comes closer to publication.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me today.
Sally. Great to see you.
Brilliant.
Cheers.